right, I am waiting for my slides to get up here. But yeah, this is not necessarily going to be a lot of like sort of teaching you about the protocol. It's more about exploring some of the possibilities that we get out of a couple of concepts that we're going to talk about. But yeah, I mean, EasyPaySy was a post to the Bitcoin dev mailing list, and the guy had basically drafted a whole protocol for doing transactions in a way that was more user-friendly. I've taken some of that and have tried to compile it in a way that's hopefully digestible, and hopefully you guys like it. Anyway, let's start with the problem. Right now, we have a bunch of things in Bitcoin that are kind of ugly. So transactions, right? Very ugly. It's 64 hexadecimal characters. You have like addresses, which are base 58 or batch 32. You have public keys, especially XPubs, that are just gigantic. And the user experience just isn't that great. So let's drill into each one of these and just take a look at it. So transactions look like this. There's no way anyone could remember that, right? Unless you like memorize digits of pi for fun, there's no way you're going to be able to figure that, like remember it or anything. It's in hexadecimal. It's 64 characters. It's impossible to remember. And when you communicate this, it's almost always done in copy paste. Addresses, similar thing, right? The first one's a base 58. The second one's a batch 32. These are gigantic. The second one in particular is really big because it's, I think that's a pay-to-witness script hash. So it's especially big. Base 58 is supposed to be like readable, but it's not really readable, right? Like I don't know how many times I've seen it written down, and like a capital K is mistaken for a lowercase k or something like that. There's a lot of mistakes that you can make. Batch 32 is better, but it's still not really exactly memorizable, right? Like it's not easy to remember. You're not going to remember your address. And again, it's all done by copy-paste, which is why they don't mind it being longer, because if you're going to copy-paste it anyway, then who cares? All right, public keys. That's what an XPub looks like. I had to shrink the font on that one because it's 111 characters, right? Like it's, and they're generally base 58. It's readable. Again, impossible to remember. Again, you have to copy-paste. And for XPubs in particular, you lose a lot of privacy, right? If you give away your XPub, you no longer have any forward secrecy whatsoever, because they know exactly what addresses to look for and which ones are yours. All right, and as a result, the user experience kind of sucks, right? Like we rely a lot on QR codes because it's hard to remember, right? You can't write things down. So you end up having to encode a lot of that data into visual things like this. And because they're impossible to remember, and because you're always copying and pasting, you have to rely on that. And as a result, there's a larger attack surface, right? Anytime you do any digital communication, somebody might man-in-the-middle you and display a different QR code than your actual address. And are you going to be able to tell? Absolutely not. If you copy and paste, and if the address letters are a little bit wrong, how are you going to be able to tell? Like there was a ransomware virus, I think, that would substitute Bitcoin addresses or based on like what page you were visiting or something like that. And basically, they had a whole list of Bitcoin addresses in that malware, and based on what the address looked like, they would pick the one that looked the closest, right? And that makes sense because users can't tell, and this is a terrible user experience. So what can we do? How can we make this better?